Hello, and welcome back to Reformed Thinking. I'm really glad you joined us again today.
Yeah, it is great to be here.
We are here to do what we love best,
Mhm.
which is opening up the texts that have shaped the Christian life for centuries and, well, really getting into the substance of them.
Absolutely. And as we always do, we are approaching this discussion from a specific starting point.
Right.
We are both Protestant Christians, and we hold to the Westminster Confession of Faith. That is our theological baseline.
Which is so critical to lay out there for you listening.
It is. We believe that creates a necessary framework for understanding the weight and the glory of the scriptures we are about to discuss today.
Yeah, we are not just looking at literature here. We are handling God's revelation. And today, we are turning our attention to Psalm 92.
A magnificent text.
It really is. But we are not doing it alone. We are going to be looking at this psalm specifically through the lens of the Prince of Preachers himself, Charles Haddon Spurgeon.
Yes, drawing heavily from his massive commentary, The Treasury of David.
A total masterpiece. And Psalm 92 is a particularly special selection for us to look at. I was looking at the title of this song, and it stands out immediately. It is titled A Psalm or Song for the Sabbath Day.
Right.
And I learned from our reading that this is actually the only psalm in the entire Psalter that carries that specific title.
That is correct. It is totally unique in that regard. It is a composition intended specifically to be sung on the day of rest.
Which is fascinating.
It is, and Spurgeon makes a beautiful point right at the outset about why that matters. He says that the subject of the psalm is the praise of God, and that praise is sabbatic work.
Sabbatic work.
Yes, it is the joyful occupation of resting hearts.
I just love that phrase, joyful occupation. We often think of rest as, doing nothing, just sitting on the couch, totally checked out.
Right, the modern view of weekend recovery.
Yeah. But Spurgeon is saying that the true Sabbath is found in God, so it is only wise to meditate upon him on that day. It is an active rest.
Precisely. And because it is for the Sabbath, the style of the psalm reflects that. It balances solemnity and joy.
It lifts the mind.
It does. It lifts the mind from the drudgery of the week to the contemplation of God's finished work.
Now, before we get into the text itself, we have to address the authorship, because I found this bit of background absolutely fascinating.
A rabbinical theory.
Yes. Apparently, there is a Jewish tradition that says Adam wrote this psalm.
Yeah, the rabbis had a theory that Adam composed this on the seventh day of creation, immediately after he was made and God rested.
Well, I mean, it is a romantic idea, isn't it? Adam in the garden, fresh from the Creator's hand, singing this song.
It paints quite a picture.
It does. But Spurgeon, well, he doesn't have much patience for that theory, does he?
No, he certainly does not. He dismisses it quite readily. He actually calls it the ravings of the rabbis.
Wow. He never minces words.
Never. And his logic is delightfully practical. He points out that the psalm later mentions wicked men and workers of iniquity.
Right.
Adam, in paradise, had no wicked men to contend with.
That is a very good point. It would be a bit premature for Adam to be complaining about enemies when he is the literal only man on earth.
Spot on. Spurgeon also notes that Adam likely didn't have a harp constructed yet.
And the psalm heavily mentions instruments.
Right. So we can safely ascribe this to David, written as the Spirit gave him utterance.
So we have David writing a hymn for the Sabbath. And the mission of this deep dive today is to understand what that Sabbath work looks like.
Yes.
We want to see how the Christian view of rest involves this active contemplation. And we want to unpack how David contrasts the fleeting success of the wicked with the steady, deep growth of the righteous.
That contrast is the absolute heartbeat of the psalm. So let's get into the first segment, dealing with verses 1 through 3. This is about the ethics and aesthetics of praise.
Verse 1 starts with a very simple statement. It is a good thing to give thanks unto the Lord. We hear that all the time.
We do.
You hear people say, well, it is good to give thanks. But Spurgeon breaks down what good actually means here in a threefold way that I found so helpful.
He does. He moves beyond a surface definition of the word. First, he says it is ethically good.
Meaning
Meaning it is the Lord's right. He is our creator and benefactor, therefore we owe him thanks. It is a matter of pure justice.
Right. It is not just a nice thing to do, it is the right thing to do. It is a moral obligation.
Second, he says it is emotionally good. It is pleasant to the human heart. It actually does the worshiper good to worship.
It lifts us up.
Yes. And third, it is practically good, because when we give thanks, it leads others to render homage as well. It has a contagious effect on the people around us.
I really like how he connects duty and pleasure there. He says, when duty and pleasure combine, who will be backward?
It is a great rhetorical question.
If it is the right thing to do, and it actually feels good to the soul to do it, we should be running to do it.
And Spurgeon adds that a Sabbath without thanksgiving is a Sabbath profaned.
Profaned, that is a strong word.
It is. He says we are loaded daily with benefits, so to let the Lord's day pass without distinct praise is to despise the gift.
Now, in verse 1, it also mentions singing praises to the name of the Most High. And here Spurgeon gets into a bit of a debate with the Society of Friends, or the Quakers, regarding silent worship.
Ah, yes. This is a classic Spurgeon moment. The Quakers, famously, sit in silence, waiting upon the Spirit.
Right, that is their whole tradition.
And Spurgeon acknowledges that silent worship is sweet. He doesn't deny that. But he argues that vocal worship is sweeter.
His argument is based on nature, right?
It is. He says nature itself is vocal. The birds sing, the brooks warble as they flow.
Everything makes a sound.
Right. So he argues that to deny the tongue, which he calls the glory of man, to deny it the function of praising God, is an unnatural strain.
He actually calls it a problem how they can deprive themselves of such a noble part of worship. And then he quotes Luther. You can always count on Luther for a strong opinion.
Indeed. Luther said, "Come, let us sing a psalm and drive away the devil."
Drive away the devil.
Yes. There is a sense in which vocal, audible praise has a spiritual strength to clear the air, so to speak, of the enemy's influence.
Moving on to verse 2, the psalmist gives us a rhythm for this praise. To show forth thy loving kindness in the morning and thy faithfulness every night. I love this distinction between what we focus on in the morning versus the evening.
It is a beautiful liturgical rhythm for the individual believer. In the morning, the focus is loving kindness.
Why specifically in the morning?
Spurgeon notes that the day is fresh. It is the time when the morn is sowing the earth with orient pearl, as he puts it so poetically.
And he makes a point about the manna, too.
Yes, God distributes the day's manna before the sun is hot. The idea is that we should catch God's mercy early. Spurgeon says we should magnify the Lord before unpleasant tasks distract the mind.
We all know how the day gets away from us. If we don't lock into that loving kindness first thing, the emails and the chores will just crowd it out.
Completely. So morning is for mercy and loving kindness. But then verse 2 says, thy faithfulness every night.
Why the shift to faithfulness in the evening?
Because evening is the time for retrospect. When you look back at the day that has just passed, you see that God kept his promises. He sustained you. You are still here.
That makes so much sense. You anticipate the kindness in the morning and you verify the faithfulness in the evening.
Precisely. Spurgeon quotes a beautiful line here. He says, every night, clouded or clear, is alike suitable for a song upon the faithfulness of God.
Clouded or clear. So whether the day was good or bad.
Right. Whether you had a triumphant day or a miserable one, God remained faithful through it.
Then in verse 3, we get to the instruments. The text mentions an instrument of 10 strings, the psaltery and the harp, with a solemn sound. Now, this brings up a bit of a tension in our Reformed heritage, doesn't it?
It really does. We have to be honest about the history here. While the psalm clearly commands the use of instruments, the interpretation of this in the church age has varied quite a bit.
Spurgeon cites Eusebius, right, an early church historian.
Yes, Eusebius gives an allegorical interpretation of this text.
This is the view that the 10 strings represent the body and soul.
That is it. Eusebius suggests the 10 strings represent the worship of the Holy Spirit performed by the 5 senses of the body and the 5 powers of the soul.
That is a very creative way to look at it.
It is a way of spiritualizing the text to apply it to the New Testament believer, avoiding the literal instruments.
And Spurgeon also brings in the Puritans and earlier church fathers like Justin Martyr and Chrysostom. They weren't fans of full bands in church, were they?
No, they absolutely were not. Justin Martyr and Chrysostom argued that instrumental music was permitted to the Jews in their infant state because of the grossness of their souls.
The grossness of their souls, that is a heavy critique.
They believed the Old Testament saints needed the external stimulation, but the church, having come of age, uses the body and the voice, the living instrument.
That is a sharp historical perspective. But Spurgeon, being Spurgeon, seems to find a middle ground, or at least a spiritual application for us today. He quotes Dr. Watts, the great hymn writer.
Dr. Watts says the best harp of solemn sound is the heart found in tune.
The heart found in tune.
Yes, and that is the key takeaway for us. Whether one uses a piano, a guitar, or just the human voice, the warning stands. Fine music without devotion is, as Spurgeon puts it, a splendid garment upon a corpse.
A splendid garment upon a corpse. That is such a vivid image. It doesn't matter how professional the band sounds if the heart is dead.
That is exactly the point.
Let's move into the second segment, verses 4 and 5. This is where we get into the logic of this gladness and the depth of God's thoughts. Verse 4 says, "For thou, Lord, hast made me glad through thy work."
Notice how the root of the joy is external to the psalmist. He is glad because of what God has done.
It is objective.
Yes, it is outside of himself. And Spurgeon differentiates the works of God into three categories here: creation, providence, and redemption.
Okay, so creation is adoring the Maker, looking at the mountains, the stars.
Right. Providence is seeing God's hand in our daily history, how he provides for us, how he steers the events of the world.
But redemption is the third category.
And Spurgeon says that while creation is great, redemption makes gladness no bounds.
No bounds at all.
When we contemplate the finished work of Christ, the atonement, silence becomes impossible. He actually says if we didn't sing, we would die.
And the verse continues, "I will triumph in the works of thy hands." Spurgeon has a great note on that word, triumph.
He likens it to a victor dividing the spoil. It is not just a quiet appreciation, it is a shout of victory.
I will triumph.
It is an aggressive joy. You have won the battle, and now you are rejoicing in the spoils.
And then immediately after this triumph, we hit verse 5. "O Lord, how great are thy works, and thy thoughts are very deep." This feels like a major shift from looking at the works to looking at the mind behind the works.
It is the shift from the action to the decree, and this is where we, as Reformed thinkers, really lean in.
Oh, for sure.
Spurgeon connects thy thoughts directly to the Reformed understanding of God's eternal decrees and predestination.
Thy thoughts are very deep. It is not something you can just wade into. It is an ocean.
It is. Spurgeon notes the massive contrast here. Man is superficial. Man is shallow. God is deep. And there is a fascinating linguistic point here that you brought up in our prep.
The Hebrew root for thoughts.
Right. The Hebrew root implies counting or interlacing.
Interlacing, like a massive design.
Yes. Think of a complex braided structure. The design is intricate with many threads. Providence, history, redemption, all knit together by the divine mind.
To us, looking at the back of the design, it might look chaotic. Just a bunch of loose threads and knots.
But the thoughts, the knit pattern, are very deep. Every thread is placed with purpose.
That is a beautiful image, but it's also dangerous ground for the arrogant, isn't it? Spurgeon quotes Augustine here with a very stern warning.
A very serious warning. Augustine says that unbelieving souls are wrecked in this depth.
Wrecked.
When men try to scrutinize God's sovereignty without faith, they drown in the abyss. Augustine's advice is this: the only safety is holding fast to the wood of Christ's cross.
That is heavy. Don't try to swim the ocean of predestination without holding onto the cross.
Precisely. We view the decrees through the lens of the cross. If we untether from Christ, we will just sink in our own speculation.
Now, this sets up a massive contrast in the text. We have just been talking about the sheer depth of God's thoughts. In segment 3, verses 6 through 9, we meet a character who is the absolute opposite of deep, the brutish man.
Yes. Verse 6 says, "A brutish man knoweth not, neither doth a fool understand this."
Spurgeon points out that the Hebrew word here is related to boorish, right?
Or even boorish, like a wild pig.
The boorish man.
It describes someone who lives entirely at the level of their appetite. They are governed by instinct and flesh, not by spiritual insight.
And the tragedy, as Spurgeon points out, is that a man can be a philosopher, an intellectual giant, and yet remain brutish in the eyes of Scripture.
How does that happen?
Well, if he fails to see the designer behind the design.
Spot on. If he looks at nature and sees only material processes and not the glory of God, he has lowered himself to the level of swine. He is rooting around in the earth for acorns and never looks up to the oak tree or the sky above it.
There is a very striking anecdote Spurgeon includes from De Quincey regarding the philosopher Immanuel Kant. Now, Kant is a titan of philosophy. His mind was incredibly sharp, but this story is chilling.
It is deeply unsettling. De Quincey recounts that Kant, in private conversation, exulted in the prospect of annihilation.
You actually look forward to it.
He wanted to rot forever like a beast. He took pride in the idea that there was no afterlife, no judgment, just biological cessation.
Spurgeon calls that the man brute. God made man a little lower than the angels, and man has been trying to get lower ever since.
It is the final degradation of the Imago Dei, taking the image of God and dragging it into the mud.
And this leads right into verse 7, where these wicked men are described as grass. When the wicked spring as the grass, it is that they shall be destroyed forever.
The analogy of grass is perfect for the point David is making. Think about grass. It springs up incredibly fast.
Especially after a rain.
It is abundant. It looks green and successful, but it has no woody fiber. It has no stability to it at all.
It is entirely superficial success.
Correct. And its end is the scythe, or the oven. Spurgeon uses a terrifying phrase here to describe this dynamic. He says, their prosperity is the fattening for slaughter.
They grow to die, they blossom to be blasted.
That is the quote. And it totally reframes how we look at the successful wicked. We look at the world and we often envy them. We see their wealth, their ease.
Right, it looks like they are winning.
But if we saw a beast being fattened up in a stall, knowing the butcher is coming tomorrow, we wouldn't envy the beast, we would pity it.
That is a staggering perspective, and it brings us to verse 8. Looking at the structure of the psalm, this seems to be the pivot point.
It is the central verse. But thou, Lord, art most high forevermore.
Everything else we just read about is moving, changing, dying, or growing. But God is.
The contrast is stark. The wicked are destroyed forever. God is high forever. And this is the core basis of the believer's security.
Because God doesn't change.
Because he is immutable, because he is the high rock forever, the believer is safe. It does not matter how much the wicked rage or how tall the grass grows, the grass will burn. The rock does not move.
And because the rock doesn't move, the enemies are scattered. Verse 9 repeats it. For lo, thine enemies, O Lord, for lo, thine enemies shall perish.
Notice the repetition. It confirms the certainty. For lo, for lo. It is as if the psalmist is pointing them out on a battlefield. Look there, they are perishing.
And Spurgeon points out their complete lack of unity. The verse says, all the workers of iniquity shall be scattered.
Evil has a self-destructive nature built into it. It cannot maintain a confederacy. They may unite against God for a moment, but self-interest drives them apart. They scatter like chaff in the wind.
Moving to segment 4, we hit verse 10. We have seen the brutish man, we have seen the grass. Now the psalmist speaks of himself. But my horn shalt thou exalt like the horn of a unicorn. Okay, we have to stop here. Unicorns.
Yes, the King James Version uses the word unicorn, but we shouldn't think of the mythical horse with a magical spiral horn on its forehead.
I am glad Spurgeon clarifies this.
He does. He cites a scholar named Weiner who identifies it as the antelope leucoryx, or the wild ox or buffalo.
So a real historical animal.
Yes, a real animal known in that region for its tremendous physical strength and its very formidable horn.
So the symbol here is sheer strength.
Unconquerable strength. The wicked are cut down like wheat grass, but the believer is exalted with the force of a wild ox. We are not defeated, we are strengthened to triumph.
And then comes one of my absolute favorite phrases in this entire psalm. I shall be anointed with fresh oil.
Fresh oil. It is such a sensory-rich image.
Spurgeon goes into the literal agricultural meaning here. It is not just new oil from the store. It is green oil.
Yes, green oil or cold-drawn oil. This is the oil squeezed from the fruit without boiling or heating it.
The first press.
Exactly. It is the purest, most fragrant, and most expensive type. It preserves the absolute essence of the olive.
And what is the spiritual application for you and me?
It is the absolute need for constant renewal. We cannot rely on the stale grace of yesterday. We cannot rely on a spiritual high we had 10 years ago at a retreat.
We need it today.
We need the fresh, cold-drawn oil of the Spirit today.
It speaks of incredible vitality. The believer is fresh, fragrant, and ready for use. Contrast that with the dry, withering grass of the wicked we just saw. One is totally drying out, about to be burned. The other is being saturated with pure oil.
It is literally the difference between life and death.
Now, in segment 5, we hit a bit of a technical snag in the translation of verse 11. The verse reads, mine eye also shall see my desire on mine enemies. But my desire is in italics in the King James Version.
Right. And Spurgeon is very critical of the translators here. He says those words, my desire, had far better been left out.
Why is he so opposed to that addition?
Because the original Hebrew simply says, mine eye shall see on mine enemies. It leaves it blank.
It doesn't fill in the emotion.
Right. When the translators added my desire, it makes the psalmist sound vindictive, as if he is gloating and wanting to see them suffer personally, like he has a specific revenge fantasy.
Spurgeon argues that the theological implication here is that we should be content to just wait on God's justice.
Spot on. The believer is content to see what God does. We don't need to prescribe what we want to see happen to our enemies. God's justice is perfect without our input.
Spurgeon has a truly great line about adding to Scripture here. He says adding human words is like repairing gold with tinsel or gems with painted wood.
It is a very strong call to let the text speak, even in its silence. Don't try to help the Holy Spirit out.
Now we come to the beautiful, expansive imagery of segment 6, verse 12, the two trees. The righteous shall flourish like a palm tree. He shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon.
These are two very different trees, and they represent two very different aspects of the saint's life.
Let's start with the palm tree. Spurgeon calls this the desert saint.
The palm grows in the desert, in dearth and severe drought. It stands out there in burning sand and scorching sun. But, and this is the key, it flourishes.
How does it manage that in a desert?
Because its taproots go down deep to hidden water sources. It is totally independent of the surface rain. It doesn't care if it rains or not this season because its life comes from a source the world cannot see.
That is heavy. The world sees the circumstances, the drought, the hardship, and thinks, well, he should be withering. But the Christian is tapping into the grace of God deep underground.
And Spurgeon notes the verticality of the palm. It is tall, slender, erect. It sends all its strength upward toward heaven.
I read that the Hindus point out 360 distinct uses for the palm tree. Fruit, shade, timber, everything.
It is incredibly fruitful and useful, and there is a lovely detail Spurgeon mentions. The dust does not adhere to the leaf of a palm.
The Christian is in the world, but not of it.
Precisely. The dust of the desert, the sin and the grime slides right off, and of course the palm is the historic symbol of victory.
Then there's the cedar in Lebanon, the mountain saint.
The habitat changes entirely here. Now we are up on the mountain summits. We are exposed to blasts, severe storms, and snow.
The palm deals with the heat. The cedar deals with the storm.
And the physical structure is different. The cedar is massy. It has massive spreading branches. It is deeply rooted into the rock itself. It represents incredible stability and longevity, living for centuries.
Spurgeon contrasts the cedar with the grass again, tying the whole psalm together. He says, grass makes hay for oxen. Cedars build the temple of the Lord.
That is the difference in destiny. One is just fodder for beasts. The other is a permanent pillar in the house of God.
And the righteous combine both of these. We are the palm and the cedar, fruitful and upright like the palm, strong and stable like the cedar.
It gives a complete, holistic picture of the Christian character.
This leads us right into segment 7, verses 13 and 14. Those that be planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God.
The absolute key word there is planted.
Planted.
Yes. Spurgeon points out that no tree in God's garden is self-sown. This points us directly back to the doctrine of election and sovereign grace. We are there because the husbandman planted us there. We didn't blow in on the wind.
And the location matters so much. The house of the Lord, the courts of our God.
The church, the ordinances, the means of grace. Spurgeon argues that professors, meaning those who merely profess faith but don't possess it, who are rooted in the world, do not flourish. You have to be rooted in the communion of Christ and his people.
And if you are planted, there's an amazing promise in verse 14. They shall still bring forth fruit in old age.
This is such a comfort, especially as the years go by. Natural law dictates that as you get older, you decay, you slow down, you become less useful. But spiritual law says the exact opposite. Grace thrives.
Spurgeon lists the specific fruits of old age. It is not necessarily the active running around energy of youth.
No, it is a different kind of fruit. It is patience, a mellow temper, sweet testimony, ripe, tested experience.
I love the phrase fat and flourishing. It sounds a bit funny to our modern ears to call an old saint fat, but it means full of sap, full of vital life.
It means they do not drag out a starving, miserable existence. God ensures their inner man is being renewed day by day, even as the outer man perishes.
Spurgeon says an aged, happy Christian is a letter of recommendation for God.
It proves God's fidelity. Think about it. If God abandons his people when they get old and weak, he isn't faithful. But he doesn't abandon them. He carries them all the way to whorehairs.
And that brings us to the final segment, verse 15, the conclusion of the entire argument. Why do they flourish? The text says, to show that the Lord is upright.
The very existence of the thriving saint is a proof of the character of God. The believer's stability is proof of the rock's stability. He is my rock, the psalmist says.
And there is no unrighteousness in him.
Spurgeon unpacks this beautifully. He says God never defrauds the believer.
Never.
He may delay rewards. We might have to wait a very long time in this life, but he never forgets. His dispensations have no flaw whatsoever.
And Spurgeon ends his commentary by tying the end all the way back to the beginning.
Yes. The psalm began with the statement, "It is good to give thanks." It ends by proving why it is good. It is good because he is the rock. and there is no unrighteousness in him. The logical argument of the song is complete.
What a path this psalm takes us on. We started with the duty of Sabbath praise. We moved through the joy of contemplating God's deep thoughts. We looked down on the destruction of the brutish wicked. And we ended up standing tall with the palm and the cedar, fruitful in old age.
It really covers the entire span of the Christian life and worldview. It places us firmly and permanently on the rock.
As we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought derived from that palm tree analogy we discussed. It is something to chew on this week.
It is a great application. Go ahead.
If the palm grows in the desert by tapping into hidden water sources, what secret springs are you drawing from when your visible circumstances dried up? When the surface rain stops, are your roots deep enough to find the water that the world can't see? Or are you going to wither like the grass?
That is the ultimate question for us, because the drought will come, the heat will come. The roots are what save you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Psalm 92 with Charles Spurgeon. We hope this truly enriches your next Sabbath.
Indeed. May you find your rest in the rock.
Until next time.